But this is actually going to be a really exciting panel because I have, I don't know, a bunch of different topics that have been boiling in the back of my head about solving for quite a few months. And I gave both Connor and Hart a grill down when I went to Istanbul about the state of solving. And what I tried to call it atomic bridges, and you didn't go with it, Hart. So that's my first question. Why didn't you use atomic bridge? Why'd you go for intent bridge?
Intense is the hype word that I think, and like I think intense emulates atomicity. I don't think it is atomic, so I think it's maybe slightly more accurate.
I think intense was the right choice in the end, but I don't know. I think atomic is nice because it makes people feel like it's more fast. I would love to hear a little bit about Connext, and it's a protocol that's been around for a very long time and has had this vision of connecting different blockchains for a long time. I want to hear how has things evolved as the Ethereum space has exploded with different rollups, how different chains have gotten adoption. How have you guys sort of adapted your product offering for that?
Yeah, so with Connext we started like many years ago with basically like state channel tech, and we kind of similarly to across adopted this idea of liquidity-based bridging and considered that as like the forefront of bridging technology. After hearing Hart's talk about like the settlement layer, we're actually in a similar kind of mindset where that is a very important layer for bridges to be in, and liquidity is kind of just like another like helpful thing on top, right? But the challenge is that sourcing liquidity is really difficult. It's much easier in a bull cycle when you have money flowing into the system, but it's also super capital inefficient. So right now, that system works well, and for end users, the experience is really nice, but it doesn't work in a system or in a future where you have thousands of rollups, not even a dozen or 2 dozen rollups. It doesn't really scale to that degree. So we are...
And the reason is because you need to have liquidity on every single rollup to be able to fulfill the transaction size that's going through.
Yeah, not just between every different chain, it's every different asset within the chain. So you can see how that just explodes in the number of different denominations of currency that you need. So we're also kind of flexing our model to discover what this intent-based world looks like. And actually, Connext right now is already kind of an intent-based protocol. I mean, everything kind of falls under intents right now. And we have a system of solvers, albeit they are they're a very small slice of the solving domain. Solutions are basically infinite, and what Connext does is we have a network of solvers, but they do a very small slice of these solutions. They just provide liquidity in the paths that users are requesting. So we're trying to think of okay, is there a way that we can expand what we do well here? And that's something that we have kind of cooking under the hood. So there's probably a little bit more to explain on that.
Okay, right. So we have 2, members representing the solver crew. I will sort of flip the question to you guys, right? There's this problem of having inventory on all the different chains, and a lot of this interoperability stuff is sort of a inventory management problem. Where do you put your inventory to be able to fulfill the demands? How do you guys think about where do you position inventory? How do you source the cost of it? And just what does the integration of a new chain actually look like?
No, that's something that we've been thinking about internally a lot. As you rightly said, this is not a very scalable model where we can think about holding liquidity on 6 chains that have the most order flow, but then going to 1,000 chains, maintaining liquidity everywhere is not practical, and it's not something that we want the status quo to be. So that said, our decision to add a new chain is always reliant on the order flow that's coming in from that. But currently we are in the middle of a few experiments to determine if there is a way to integrate with an existing market maker auctions to perhaps source liquidity on these destination chains. So holding liquidity and inventory management isn't something that we focus on as much as we focus on swapping and removing the need of having to hold liquidity on each of these chains, and if we can just swap our way to it, I think that's what we work towards, and that's how we're thinking about it.
Yeah, we don't hold inventory. We don't really want to take on that risk. We just want to abstract all the actions and find optimal paths. we just offset this to market makers. I do think maybe 6-7 months ago, solvers started envisioning combining market makers, rule inventory, and being a solver for these intent networks. Now, for me, it's very clear the distinction. Solvers are graphing the route and finding the optimal paths, finding the edges. Market makers provide this liquidity. So a lot of market makers are plugging into their cash flow, they're aggregating other market makers, or plugging directly into market makers to get this edge as well. So I don't ever see them combining. I think people experimented it 7-8 months ago, but now it's clear separation.
Well, what does that interface between the market maker and the solver look like?
This is why hash flow exists, because they just aggregate all of it. So it's one unified API that you can plug into, and then they source the best quotes. A lot of market makers have different APIs, so that the solvers need to integrate every single one. And then you've got people like native.org that are also having token labs in the background, and so forth.
And does that allow you to have the inventory on the target chain that you're looking for?
They have the inventory, and then you can like add call data at the end, so you can append, let's say, steps or prepend what you'd like to do with that inventory. So you don't need to have exposure on any chains. You just build call data as tools.
So Anoma Cross has also its own sort of liquidity on the target destination chain that runs out. How does that model sort of differ?
Yeah, so this is where thinking about inventory management actually matters a lot. And so, like Eddie's point here is very real. If we have 1,000 rollups with 10 assets each, that's an impossible inventory management problem if it takes you 7 days to get your assets on those chains. If it takes you 10 minutes to get your assets on and off those chains, and that's relatively affordable, maybe that's a solvable problem, right? And so maybe we get there in like ZK land, ZK rollup land. We're not there yet. So, okay, what to do first? First of all, do you really need 10 assets? I'm actually of the opinion, and I'm going to see where Usman goes here, that the things you need to move between chains are 3 or 4 things, mainly. And maybe it ends up being like stablecoin and ETH or something like that. So that helps. But then the next question is, okay, well, why don't we separate the risk? There is some segment of people out there that are passive liquidity providers who would be very happy to provide liquidity to a solver network in order for them to do their solving and market making. And I look at it just from like a risk preference perspective. A solver like Propeller heads wants a really high, they're actively using capital, they demand a really high return on their capital, and that's their business model. There's other guys like me personally, I'm not doing that. I'll happily earn 15% on my ETH or something like that. And so then now there's like a trade here. Can we design something of like a cross-chain single asset lending market that will lend liquidity to solvers so they can do their solving business, charge them a small fee, but basically provides them with the ability to take repayments on the chain where they want liquidity. And just to finish this, so Across basically does this. So you can think of like Across as LP pools, but like what those LP pools are really doing is they're like a convenience function to our solvers to allow them to take their repayments where they want money. And the thing that's actually kind of cool and a kind of unknown feature is a relayer, we call them relayers. So a solver or relayer on Across can fill a user going from Arbitrum to Optimism, but actually take the repayment on like Base or on Ethereum, on a third chain. And then we price that dynamically, so those pricing changes based on like utilization on that route.
But this is under the assumption solvers generate revenue, and they generate large amounts of fees. So the percentage that they need to pay should be very, very small. Like the whole purpose of the competitions, particularly on Howe Swap, some solvers are even losing money to get trades. So having this mechanism paying interest, the amount needs to be very, very small.
So I don't have all the economics in front of me, but
Connor, you're stealing my fire. My last question was, who the hell makes money in all this? but we can skip right there. So I'll put a little bit more context, right? Which is like solvers have a very difficult job. They don't have inventory. They're trying to provide a route, and it's a highly competitive game. They're coding against a bunch of other solvers that do searching of routes, and you're trading off like engineering mindset, like talent, and being able to program these algorithms and compute power that you put behind these routes to be able to get margins, very small margins, on the efficiency of your trade. So how do you make money off of this? How do you actually settle these orders that are coming in from these bridges while still running a business?
I mean, just to respond directly, just on across here, our relayers make money. It's like, so a lot of our gas costs are really low, and we really do have a very big advantage over our competition on our gas costs, which means that we can charge small amounts, and they're small for lending assets, but that equates to like real APIs for the LPs that are finding passive liquidity, and relayers are still able to earn enough that it's profitable for them.
The pushback is this: what if someone forks lacrosse and then reduces the fee that gives to solvers so that it gets routed through these aggregators?
Well, we're going to do that too. We're going to end up running like auctions, so solvers compete on price rather than compete on speed. And so like Ankit's piece from Frontier, I actually had a really framed it this way. We're on across today, it is solver speed competition with basically, the way it works is when a user bridges, across suggests a fee that the bridge user agrees to, and then solvers race to earn that fee. And so there's some juice.
Across suggests a fee that the bridge user?
The bridge user will then sign the order, so
right.
Here's the fee I'm willing to pay.
Right, so I go to like a bridge aggregator, I request a quote, Across gives me a quote, it says, oh look, it's still cheaper than all the other bridges because it's the only intent bridge, and I'm willing to take this. Right? But let's say there's a future where there's multiple different intent bridge, then you guys will be competing with the other ones on the fee that you charge. Right?
Well, we're going to do that too. So we'll run an auction, right? So people will come and be like, okay, now solvers are going to compete on price. Ideally, we want them to compete on price and speed, and we'll talk about that later. But they'll compete on price for the best price. And now I think that price should compete down to a zero profit margin, right? Like you're supposed to squeeze people. But zero profit doesn't mean you make no money. It means it's like, this is the economic concept of zero profit. It means after you pay your server cost, like your actual costs, and your your edge, your IP, your intellect, like what's left over, you don't get to make excess profits. And frankly, from a bridge or interop perspective, that's the way it should be. And I think that's cool, right? Competition's great. User gets a great fill. And solvers shouldn't be losing money. I don't think that makes any sense here. But it should be a hyper-competitive game.
Yeah, and what we see in all these markets that do tend towards competition is you have a few members that end up emerging, maybe 2-3 different solvers that either have the scale, the economies of scale, or the inventory to be able to compete. And the pricing is still very efficient. You can still call it a competitive market, even though it's an oligopolistic market. It is still efficient at providing really good quotes to the end users. I want to flip it back to Connext a little bit, and maybe we touched on a few things. We touched on crossing sort of shake coins from one chain to another versus the majors. We talked about solver competition and profitability. I wonder what's your guys' perspective on this?
So actually, if you just look at the volume of transactions going through our group specifically, it's mostly weighted toward the stables and the major assets, right? So in a lot of cases, it doesn't make sense for us to go out and get liquidity for these share coins. And I think that actually might go towards supporting towards thesis of the single asset pool and really optimizing that as a place for solvers to look for liquidity to use. And I do have a question for the solvers, the people who are building the solvers, because it sounds like to me that cost is not the only part of the equation, or revenue. It's also building trust. So the more solutions you provide, the more users you get routed to you, the more you can get later. So even if you're taking, if if you're making negative revenues, like it can still be beneficial, right? Like, is that part of the equation?
Predatory pricing, that's what that's about.
But I doubt like that works because in auctions order flow isn't sticky. So even if you are subsidizing costs right now to win order flow, doesn't guarantee that you'll win the next auction, right? So,
It's not like user acquisition. I mean, even when you acquire users, there's still a risk of them leaving, right?
It's acquiring more intent networks that you can be a solver on, and more people to consume your API. So if you're playing the game that you lose money in every single trade and you subsidize it with token rewards, which a lot of solvers are doing, you get more order flow from different avenues. And then you just play this game, who can subsidize the most, who may not exist in 6-7 months. So there is a benefit of doing it.
So on the solver side, what do you think the competition will evolve into? What do you think the edge is long term?
I think the edge is not routing. I think that's fine. We can all compete in pricing, who has the most price optimization, but if we want intents to succeed, it's more about what actions can you do in different chains. So intents are meant to abstract all of this logic away, and merely what we're doing right now with intents is swapping and bridging. And I think solver's edge in the future will be how much exposure do you have on different chains for different actions of DeFi or NFT or whatever it may be, and then offering this to intent networks.
I would definitely agree, and I think there is some edge that you can build on the kind of features that you offer. For example, one of the things that we're about to launch in a couple of days is this intent-based API where now wallets can just plug into one API, it kind of abstracts a big gas for the user, approvals are kind of batched into one, and you don't need to implement 4.3.7 for it. So now you have to find more creative ways by offering a different feature set to attract the same amount of flow. Usually that means better UX experience.
So are solvers always sort of competing for order flow, for access to order flow, differentiated order flow that others don't have access to?
Like we specialize in DeFi routing, so being able to interact with your balance or Aura or whatever it may be, that's where we specialize. We do the swaps, but other people are better than us at swaps. So that's our niche that we focus on. And there's only one other solver, C solver, that does this, but we get a lot of volume. We do Gnosis chain as well. We get like SDI, XDI, so we get all that order flow from Gnosis Pay and so forth.
So when it comes to this order flow, right, and sort of capturing order flow, there's always sort of this incentive to say like, oh, I'm going to aggregate all the other aggregators. Like I'm just going to go one level above, and then I'm going to have more integrations and I'm going to be able to like propagate more. Where does that end?
I mean, if we do define a standard for, let's say, intents, and let's go simple and say we're just doing cross-chain limit orders right now, like we're just doing swaps. And if there was the way I mentally think of it is, it's not complicated. It's like an order ticket. The user has an order ticket. They're like input asset amount, output asset amount, minimum amount, right? And like input chain and output chain, right? And then they just sign that. And if we had something like that as a standard, and the user signs that, and then it gets thrown into probably
all of these systems,
right? But it gets
every single one of them.
But like that is what's going to be the best execution for the user. It will be ridiculously competitive at the solver layer for just those types of cross-chain swaps, which like is where the end state should be. I think we should embrace that. And then, like, there isn't this kind of like aggregation of all these fragmented different APIs. It's just here's the user order ticket, let's go fill it. And then I think the question goes, and I'm curious to hear what people think, is then how do we extend that from just a cross-chain limit order to something maybe a little bit more interesting too?
Do you envision these, let's say you create the standard and it then plugs into all the intent networks, do you envision these intent networks also subsidizing in their native token to also get that order flow, to get more surplus? So the solvers are doing this right now, right? On the rewards they get from certain protocols. Do you see the intent networks doing this? Because then you've also got this whole layer of those networks also competing, and the solvers are not going to plug into every single network. Because if you integrate with every single solver network as a solver or intent network, it takes you weeks, right? Because every protocol upgrades and so forth. So you're going to get these buckets of solvers supporting certain networks. And then do you envision intent networks rewarding their native token?
So the way I see it, and I actually think there's probably a lot to dig into with you on this, so maybe we do this more.
Please, we have 10 minutes left. We have to fill it, so let's go.
Well, the way I see it is like, let's go back to this mental model of this like order ticket that the user signed, and they literally like sign with their private key. So where does that order ticket go? I imagine it's going into different RFQ systems at the top layer. And so like Uniswap will have an RFQ system, and like Cross will have an RFQ system, and then increasingly I think applications themselves will have an RFQ system. And how shared they are, open question or whatever. But and at each of those RFQ systems, there's an opportunity to take a cut for the owner of that order flow. So like Uniswap charges the fee to them. Now, from a solver perspective, every one of those RFQ systems is going to want every solver possible listening to them. And if you have a standard order ticket, it should be zero integration work for the solvers to listen to all those systems. Okay, so that's like your top layer, and then your middle layer, all the solvers are listening to systems and all competing, and they're kind of, and it ends up needing to be like a standard for how these RFQ systems operate. That's where I'm not totally sure that will evolve. Like I could see the different, like there being differences there in how they work, but I don't know. That's what I'm at. And then the bottom layer, right, is in this cross-chain world. At least the way I see it, these user assets are escrowed until the intent is fulfilled and verified is fulfilled. So then there's another need for a settlement layer at the bottom. And I think there can be competition at that settlement layer. There can be different ways of doing that escrowing and then verification of the intent. And that's where, like, Across's vision is we want to just be a really, really efficient, secure, competitive settlement layer that does have some economies of scale. And so to answer your question, like, so this, if there is this standard order ticket, perhaps we have fairly standardized auctions at the RFQ level, and then we have a sort of standard for what the settlement layer looks like, and there's kind of competition everywhere.
Could you expand a little bit on what competition at the settlement layer looks like?
Yeah, so for example, Uniswap X doesn't, we talked to them pretty closely because their design is quite similar.
They're great, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
We love them.
We do love them. But their design, as outlined in their white paper, has user assets getting escrowed on the origin chain on per, like each trade has its own escrow, basically. And then they get filled on the destination chain, and then they get optimistically repaid on the origin chain. Okay. So in this, first of all, there's an inventory management problem. They can't get repaid on anywhere other than the origin chain. And you also then have like gas fees of repaying the solver for each transfer. What a cross does is we kind of escrow them in like a pool, so kind of a cross-chain pool, and that allows us two efficiencies. One, we can repay the solver on any chain in our network, and two, we batch repay them, which means we have gas costs, just like one transfer to the solver every epoch, every period. And so when we're talking about this, these are two different settlement layers, the way I look at it. And I think that there should be competition. I think, frankly, the user should be able to pick their settlement layer, or maybe have a list of settlement layers they are okay with for maybe different trust assumptions. And then the solver can go and pick the settlement layer that works best for them.
I'm almost picturing already like the solver goes from just routing to like on-chain liquidity pools. Now they're like doing this job of routing these messages through all these RFQ systems and settlement layers that are off-chain. So like the solving job just like goes from being just on-chain to also being with all these off-chain API systems.
Like I was about to ask, you mentioned this idea of a standard, a single unified standard. But if there is value capture to be had at that layer, we can probably expect multiple standards competing at the top layer too, and then it's just the entire stack. Every single place is an auction. It's a race to zero to all the layers.
Maybe, but this is where I think the solvers have power too, right? Or like, they don't have exactly pricing power, but everybody wants the maximum off-chain liquidity possible. There is, like, that is a positive sum game where everybody, like, we all want all the solvers solving every network. So
We sort of talked about the liquidity fragmentation problem, right? And like, does it turn out that the solution is just to take all the liquidity off chain?
I mean, I'm. Some people don't like this, but I am totally cool with it because there's permissionless entry to this. So one of the things that I think people should actively critique is if this all just becomes like HFTs in like traditional finance. That's problematic because you don't have permissionless entry to this market. You have people that just have regulatory barriers, and they.
Ooh, this is a spicy topic. Okay, I like this.
Well, but this is my take. Where provided you
Have you tried to sign up a solver to 1inch?
But this I think needs to change, and I think it will change. I think we haven't figured out how to do like decentralized auctions properly yet.
I'm not sure if it will change. Their incentive is a token utility and a narrative that is solver network. There's two different parts. If they really wanted a true intent protocol, they would have more than 5 solvers, 2 of which are run by them.
I think I think competition wins. Like I think that if you can build a better, like let's call it a better 1inch, a better consumer-facing application, and it's better because there is maximum solver competition, you will win.
You know, I'm sort of saying this tongue-in-cheek because this like permissionless nature of being able to allow solvers to receive messages is a non-solved problem. And in many ways, it's both the way that you can sort of create these order flow auctions that are more PFOF style models, right? By saying, hey, you're not competing over the individual order and the right to fill it, but instead you're competing over a seat at the table to be able to see access to all the overflow. Okay? So it's like a gatekeeping aspect where it's not completely permissionless, but you're running an auction to be able to get access to the flow. It's called a picking for a flow model. But there's another aspect that's sort of an issue that comes in designing these types of auctions, which is privacy. Like, how much do you want to leak about the user's intents or the user's desires, trades, whatever, to a public permissionless set of actors? There's also some downsides on efficiency that come from doing that.
I think Vlad is right. Your intentions will be used against you. This thing is very clear. I mean, CowSwap is fully open. So people assume only solvers can see the requests. Every single person can go and see this. They can even assume what the solvers are proposing in the auction and also front. So this is already kind of open as such. Being able to execute and also propose routes, that's permission. But the viewing of it all is open right now. And I can imagine some people are using users' intentions against.
In 2 weeks, we are going to drop some juicy research talking about just that. So,
What's the findings?
we will know in 2 weeks.
It's funny, guys, because I used to trade government bonds like a long time ago at Goldman Sachs, and it is an RFQ system. Like my job was pricing RFQ trades, where etiquette, like half of the rules were enforced by etiquette, and so that's not a very good enforcement technique here.
Well, social norms are everything. All crypto is enforced by social norms. Come on.
Exactly. It's a whole other panel, right? I don't, for modest-sized orders, I think seeing that order flow is fine. I think personally, and I want to find some economic research, but sure, really large trades, yeah, you want privacy on that. But modest-sized trades, I think if you have strict and clear rules about how that order flow should be handled, that is where you're going to get like efficiency and execution gains. And the information leakage of like, I want to sell 10 ETH for USDC, it doesn't matter.
I mean, the solvers in theory could be very malicious here, right? It's to be met. We see the order request before it hits the member. Solvers generally, as far as I've seen, have a good moral compass. As far as I've seen, who knows, in the next couple of months. And they're not using this maliciously because they know other solvers will be able to figure this out and will call them out. This happened with some solvers that were playing a little bit malicious on other networks, and yeah, they just got outed for it. So I think there's also that layer of morality and being exposed for what you're doing. Because it's not that you're an anon searcher, there's teams behind this. there's faces, there's real companies.
I wouldn't have expected that, honestly.
All right, we're running out of time. I wonder, any final words about solving in 2024?
It's not just swaps.
It's not just swaps.
It could be all actions on any chain. That's what intents are meant to be. Let's maybe expand out to swaps.
I think that's a 2026 problem.
We're still just swapping.
If you do swaps today, then you're the best at it.
I'm interested in seeing how solvers can actually collaborate in this space, like not just on a standard, but also because like you're all operating on information asymmetry, right? Like everybody has their own specific information in their back pocket, and there are solutions that can't be solved by any single one by itself, right? So in aggregate, like composite solutions can be possible. So I'm interested in seeing how that develops in space.
All right. Big round of applause. Thank you very much.